Well, you can do all those things and so much more. Just grab a seat in the chair or the floor. Sit back, relax, recline. Well, she drops another casual line. You're tuned into Casually Mollie with Mollie Amburgey.
Welcome back to the Casually Mollie podcast. I am your host, Mollie Amburgey, and we are coming back strong from a 4-month hiatus of the podcast. So thank you to our loyal listeners again for coming back and listening to this episode. Just a couple of announcements before we get into our interview with our next guest. We are so excited to announce our upcoming shows at the Golden Hoosier. This is casually happening. Thank you so much to everybody who has been supporting these shows. We had a successful show just earlier this month at the Funny Bone in St. Charles. So shout out to them for allowing us to do a show there. But our home, the Golden Hoosier, located in South City, we have our upcoming show November 30th with headliner Angela Smith Winfrey, and of course featuring comedians Charlie Winfrey and Chad Wallace. It'll also be hosted by yours truly. Tickets are going to be $15 and will be found on Eventbrite. Just remember, with the other previous shows, we have sold out. So make sure you get your spot if you want to come. And if you can't make it in November, don't worry. We have one more show to close out our 2022 season. It is going to be a double headliner exclusive on December 14th with two of my dear friends and podcast guests, Larry Green and then Max Price. We haven't had them on the podcast yet, but we're going to. But they're going to be a double headliner. We are so excited to have them. I will be on the lineup, and then we have Ellie Kirchstoffer, newcomer to St. Louis comedy, but we're so happy to have her. Again, that is December 14th at 7:30 p.m. Make sure you get your tickets on Eventbrite as well for $15. So just November 30th or December 14th, just meet us at the Golden Hoosier on South City. It's a fun night of a Wednesday night, and you're going to have a great time. But speaking of a great time, I am so excited to introduce our next guest. She is very talented. I've had the exceptional pleasure of being able to see her perform on stage. She has an album coming out, which she's going to talk about. So give it up for comedian Jill Maragos, everybody. Round of applause. Everyone's going crazy. Hello.
Myself.
Oh my gosh, I still have lipstick on my teeth. Yes, this is great. Andy, we got to put an effect next time. I love it. Oh,
That's
man.
Raucous applause. It was just almost over the top standing O.
As usual. I love it, though. Jill, thank you so much for agreeing to come on the podcast and talk to us. Of course. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Like I said, I had the pleasure of getting to see you perform. I think I may have told you this in person, but the first time I saw you perform, I was like first starting out in comedy, and you came to the Funny Bone, and I think you were featuring for James Johan that night.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm,
yeah. That was a few years back. That was was that at the Funny Bone then?
Yeah. Yes. It was because I've only been doing comedy for like 5 years, but I remember walking in and I was like, that lady, not only is she hilarious, but she has the best pants ever. You had like these, yes, and they were so awesome. You were so funny.
Were they plaid?
Yes. Yeah.
I got so many compliments on those pants. You have no idea. Like so many compliments on those pants. They're from Target.
Yeah. Aren't the best things. I mean, it's great. Oh, that makes me so happy that I wasn't the only one. I mean, your comedy was obviously spectacular, but I was like, she's like beautiful. She's funny. She's got great pants. Like what? And then I think
the whole package.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, the pants just like sealed the deal. They're like, listen. But it was, I think I saw you were, did you perform with Chris Porter at one point too at Helium? Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. I featured for him there the first time in the St. Louis Helium. Yeah.
Oh, cool. And then I think when I officially met you, though, was also at Helium. I think it was after your show in the garage, and everybody's like grabbing a drink and whatever. And I just was like, and I think it was hilarious because there was this group of people that were there, and I don't know if they had just discovered, I don't know what happened. I can't remember the whole scenario, but they were just like loving you and talking to you afterwards. And you were so gracious and so kind to them. And then you talked to me. Yeah.
I think they were I honestly think they were pitying me at that point because the garage show. What's crazy is I was given the, headline the garage show at the St. Louis Helium to like prep for the album so I could run the whole hour. And it was just not, it was so quiet. It was so quiet. And so getting all those, that was me getting all those drinks, I think. And then I had met, I think Max Price was there and he had featured he had hosted for me and Chris Porter at the Helium show. So I remember him. And then Bobby J. Cox was there. And then I can't remember the name of the woman who hosted for us, but she was great. She was really funny.
Corey Stewart, maybe?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I was like, what's a guess?
I can tell you her jokes. Like, that's usually what I remember is like, she jokes. We talked about this. But yeah, so it was just one of those things. We're all kind of hanging out and they were really lovely and nice. I'm sorry you had to see that one.
No, if anything, I had the best time. I just felt bad because I was kind of like laughing out loud, and I know it was like a quieter audience, and then there's like this loud Italian in the back, like cracking up at things. I was like, oh, this is so embarrassing. Like Jill's gonna be like, what is wrong with this woman?
because the funniest thing for all comics is to watch another comic just eating shit on stage. It's just funny because we've all been there and we laugh because we're so uncomfortable, and that just means that if you ever question being a comic, you're a comic because it's hilarious to watch somebody just eat shit for an hour. And did. And what's crazy is like the weekend before, I was at the Indianapolis Helium upstairs.
Yep.
And just great shows. Just this album's gonna be fantastic. And then I went to the St. Louis Helium garage room and I'm like, oh no. Like, what am I doing? What have I done? But that's cool. I didn't realize you'd seen me so many times. It's really nice to know and that you remembered me. I just assume everybody forgets I'm alive once I leave the room. So.
If anything, I was like, she's going to think I'm so weird that I remember each time I've seen her perform.
No. I'm the same way. I'm not like, I might not know, like, I'll be like, I know them. They have a joke about vests. Like, I'm the worst with names, but I'll be like, oh, they had this great detail about this joke. Like, I only remember bits.
Oh, good. Okay, so we're on the
I'm
same
not judging
page.
You at all.
Yay! Because when I saw you at the Funny Bone, I remember there was this lady that came up to me, and she was like, she reminds me of Marvelous Miss Maisel. What's her name? And I said, Jill, but I didn't remember your last name. So and I was like, look her up though. She's great, right? I'm like, I'm just,
and I'm the worst for self-promotion. I'm always like, I don't have business cards. I didn't feel like bringing them. They're like, how do you just Google just my name if you remember? And so like everyone's like, my goal is just to be like, oh, that lady who opened for so-and-so was funny. Like, and then just disappear into oblivion. I don't know. It's so stupid. I'm the worst at it.
I kind of love that. It's like a dark horse effect. You're just like, I'm here. This is happening.
And I'm gone. And I just disappear.
I was like, so those are some of my favorite people. So I love that. It's like the right amount of fame, So
just go in, get your good feelings for the weekend, and then go home and nobody knows who you are at the grocery store.
Oh my God. Well, they're obviously going to know you now that you've been on this podcast. But speaking of right, exactly. All the follows, precisely. All the fame, casually knowing Jill Maragos. Let's talk about, speaking of comedy, let's talk about your comedy album. First of all, I appreciate you letting me use your code. I got to listen to it. I had the best time. I was laughing I was sitting doing some like promotion stuff for some upcoming shows in our little like dining room table area. And my fiance was cracking up because he could just hear me laughing from upstairs because I have such a loud laugh. And he's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, oh, just casually listening to Jill Maragos. Don't mind me. So why don't you tell us about your album and just kind of, just why you decided to do it at this point in your career? Like, when were you like, this is the time for me to make this album?
Well, I've always been sort of a go with the flow type person. So, I'm trying to think of how it went. I had gotten a feature gig in Portland at the Portland Helium. And so I was looking to do another gig. I think it was in St. Louis. So I contacted the person who was the manager at the Portland Helium. And he just was like, here, talk to these people. And it turned out to be the guy who like books all the headliners for the Helium. And I was like, this is overkill, but okay, you know. And so he helped get me in to do some stuff. And he was the one who said, hey, would you be interested in doing an album? And it was like the middle of the pandemic. And I was like, absolutely not. No, like, yeah, but no, like this is, you know, like I'm going to do it to like 8 people with tables. Like this is like a nightmare for me because I hate saying no because I have like, oh no, if I say no, they're never going to ask again.
I know.
But then also I was like, yeah, like you don't want to give up an opportunity, right? So I said I need time to get it together, and I just basically thought I'll take the best of all my old stuff, and I'm going to take this and do the best of all my old stuff, and then work in all my favorite new stuff because that'll give me 45 minutes to an hour. And so I just was like, okay. And then once things kind of started to come back where we had enough people in the room, I was like, well, let's go ahead and record it, I guess. And I'm from Buffalo, so I wanted to do it at the Buffalo Helium, which they didn't tell me was a horrible mistake.
Oh, really?
Goes up. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So I did my 1 hour there in front of everybody I've ever known and met because I'm from there. And it was awful. It was totally awful and horrible. And I talked to the guy who did the recording, and he's like, well, if you're not happy, you know, we can just do it as many times, but it's not a problem. So I was in Portland, and I said, look, I'm going to be doing, you know, feature shows there for the weekend. Why don't we just record all of them? And we did. We just took like a few of the sets and put them together, and that became the album. So, you know, it was a nightmare, but you know, in the best way. You know, it's an honor to be asked because I hate being like, can I do this? Am I allowed to do these things? And they were great about being patient, and I'm very OCD about stuff. I'm like, I don't want that in. I said this word twice. You got to take that. But yeah. So it was. That's the story of how it became, I guess. Is that okay? Is that
that's wonderful? Right, oh my God, that is so interesting. When I listened to it, I was like, oh, this is seamless. Like she must have just gone in there. This could have been like maybe a couple of shows thrown together and then done. Like I felt like everything followed correctly and had a great sequence and went together. So the fact that you said, oh yeah, also I hated this big mistake, so then I went over here and I recorded. I'm like, oh, I would have had no idea, which means that you're an expert to your craft for knowing what sounds right and what works. So props to you for not just settling and actually like, you know, saying like, here, this is what I want, and I'm creating something. And I think a lot of times it's just like what you said. You don't want to be difficult. You don't want to be like, can I do this? You don't want to beg. But at the same time, if you're producing something with your name on it, you want it to be of quality. So I totally understand. Right.
It's also like, I'm very specific. This might get comedy nuts and bolts a little bit, but I'm very specific about the order my material has to go in because I'm a little bit cuckoo bombs. I talked to somebody a long time ago, like when I first started comedy, who was saying, if you watch Richard Pryor's Live on the Sunset Strip, it's broken into 3 parts. Like the first third is how I see the world. The second third is how the world sees me. And then the last third is how I see me. So his set gets more and more intimate as the hour goes on. And that's always been sort of how I set things up, because people in general aren't buying a ticket to see me. Like they're buying a ticket for a headliner who they know. And then I happen to be on, doing 20 to a half hour on their show. So it's always been my goal to be like, let them get to know you a little bit before you start talking about your vagina or whatever. Like, you know what I mean? Like you wouldn't go up to somebody at a party and be like, hi, so about my vagina. They'd be like, whoa, you know, like you kind of have to know somebody a little bit before you start dropping like, and you know, I'm not super dirty, but I also like want to have a little bit of a buy-in and have them get to know who I am first. So anytime I do a set, even if it's, whatever order the material, whatever material I do is always in that order. Yeah. So it actually made it easier to edit because I can be like, well, this bit or these 3 bits that I did goes right here. You know what I mean?
Yes. Oh, it's
structural.
Yes. You just said it. Yes. I was about to say, I was like, it was so structured, but it was still like relaxing and comical where I could relate to a lot of things. Cause I also have a fiance who is like really into cars and things like that. And I was also like, I shouldn't say I was a nerd, but I also like, I didn't have the brains you had to be like in engineering and all these things, but I did always like to read and people would always be like, oh, she's always like reading a book or something like that. And it was never like the cool. Yeah, exactly. And I was
like a horrible thing.
Right.
For educating herself like a loser. You know?
Right. So when I listened to you, I was like, oh, she gets me. I get it. Like, this is great. Which is why I want to ask you, like, you know, you were in your set and in your album, you talk about, you know, it being in engineering. When did comedy come into play where you're like, oh, let me try this out. Let's see what happens.
I got dragged with a friend of mine. So when I moved to California years ago, before I'd done any performing at all, I had a friend who we were actors. I mean, I was in very little, but we were being in actors things. We were doing things that made us say we could be actors. But we were never, you know what I mean? I was never a star. And she wanted to take this stand-up class. And I thought, well, I would like to know why jokes are funny. You know, I want to know the math of it, and I'll do it with you, because she didn't want to do it alone. And so we went, and it was down in LA, and I didn't live there. And the whole, like, the final class was supposed to be like your show or whatever. And I thought, well, I've done what I wanted. I just wanted to know what was funny, you know, how to write a joke, or, you know, what made things funny. And so I'm like, I'm not going to do it. I don't need to do it. Like, I didn't, it's part of the thing. And so the teacher got real mad at me. And she's like, you need to do it. And I'm like, oh, I can't bring anybody. Like, I don't know anybody here. And she, you know, we went back and forth. I'm like, I'll do it. And she's like, never mind. And I was like, okay. And then finally I was like, if you want me to, I will. And she's like, fine, you can do it. And I'm like, well, now it's going to be fun. And she put me up like last. Which is, I'm like, this is, you know, the best spot, really, because everybody's like drunk or whatever. And then she went up right after me and did 10 minutes. Like, she's a pretty good she used to write for Chelsea Handler and stuff.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I'm not like super pro stand-up comedy classes. I really didn't like plan on being the stand-up comedy. It was like for an education more than anything. But she was pretty good about saying, like, here's how you hold a mic, or here's, you know, what you do. Don't do these little, you know, just little like good tips and stuff. Mm-hmm. And I threw out half the jokes that she encouraged me to say. So I'm like, I'm not doing any of that. I'm not, you know, it doesn't make sense to me. So that's not a good joke for me. So that's how it started. And then suddenly, like, it became, I don't want to say easier, but like as an actor, I was always like, please, I was sending out postcards to casting directors and, you know, trying to get into classes and I had to like scream, please, can I see you, you know? And so it was so difficult. And so with stand up, it just became this thing where it's like, oh, I met so-and-so and they're like, do you want to do a guest spot at the Improv in Las Vegas? I'm like, yeah, okay.
Like, sure.
Over here. And I'm like, all right, you know. And people just tended to hire me, and it just kind of, it's its own thing, really. You know, I'm kind of lucky. I feel like it was meant to be, only because it's been so much easier than acting was. Mm-hmm.
You have such not just because you have such a natural delivery and talent for it. So I'm really happy that you're doing it. And I'm not just saying that. Like I said, I listened to your album. I've seen you perform. I was like, and cut. We're going to say what we really feel about Jill right after this break. No,
what a bitch.
What a bitch. Yeah. Laugh through this. Am I right? Yeah. Right. I am.
After this, maybe, because this is shitty.
Just follow at Jill Maragos and you'll really get it now. You should, though, for sure. I really am happy for you, though, because I understand I was a theater major and I don't do a lot of acting anymore as much either, just because there is something really addictive and fun and surprising about comedy. And it does just kind of, after a certain point, you start networking and things. But I love that you brought up, you're like, oh my God, gosh, like I really had to like claw my way in, because people all the time, like the biggest thing I see about even just when people come to open mics, they are like, oh, this is going to be so easy, right? Like this is going to be so easy. And then they get up there, they completely eat shit and they're like, that was so difficult. So I appreciate you like, you know, highlighting that. You mentioned about the postcards and everything, which I loved just because, you know, with social media today, we do have a tendency to forget that we, you know, had like postcards and flyers. And, you know, I remember like being a theater kid doing shows and being like, oh, let me just open up my trunk. Nothing creepy about that. And hand you a flyer. You can come see this at this black box theater with like 40 seats at 8 p.m.
Yeah.
So has that
murder me after it's all like basically like, here's where I'll be. Murder me.
It's so true, which is why I wanted to ask you, do you feel like social media maybe has like helped your career in some way and getting your album out and things like that? Do you think it's been a good tool for comedians today?
I will say to the people who are good at it, it helps their career. I'm not good at it. I'm really not. I've been told somebody, you need to do more. You need to, and I'm like, yeah. I'm the worst because I just like to live in the moment. Like if I walk my dogs, I leave my phone at home. I want to just be, you know. That being said, I've met people, like I became friends with Gary Goldman over Twitter, like actual, not just Twitter friends, like actual real world friends. And he's like a big hero of mine, like as a writer and as a comedian. And I've had some of the best like ever conversations about writing and comedy with him. And then Alonzo Bowden, I messaged him one day over Instagram and we'd never met. Like I worked with his friend John Heffron and we kind of became friends over Instagram. Like we followed each other, but we didn't know each other. And he's really into motorcycles. I ride motorcycles. And I just messaged him on Instagram and was just like, hey, we both like motorcycles and comedy. We should work together. So, after a couple of bourbons, I'm going to be normal sobriety. I wouldn't have had the guts to do that. But he's like, yeah, okay. And so I got to feature for him like a couple weekends ago. And it was great. Like we totally get along and like he's wonderful. And so in those ways, yeah, it has. But I also am like, I don't like putting like clips of new stuff up online because I just feel like it kind of burns it a little bit. So I've been sort of protective about like, oh, it's a new bit. I don't want to put it out there for everybody to see on, you know, TikTok or whatever and have it get like 100,000 views. And then it's sort of like, oh, that old joke again. So I don't know if that's the case really, because I've had other people say people want to see it live once they've seen it on, you know, social media, but I'm protective of it, like in a bad way. Anyway, but yeah, so yes and no. I'll say yes. I'll say 50-50 on that one.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's also a balance of it too, being like, you know, how much do you put on? What do you put on? And it is good too to be protective of your work as a comedian because it is like what you're selling. You're selling your ideas, your thoughts, your personality and everything. Which kind of brings me back to it does bring me back to your album, Laugh Through This. Why don't you tell us a little bit why you chose specifically that title for your album?
Well, I'm a big like 90s music person, and that was the original whole cover was called Live Through This, and it was sort of iconic. And I have a very good comic friend, Pat House, and we always talk about music, and I'm like, I should just do this. But it also sort of reflected, you know, the time of the pandemic and my career in and of itself. Like, you gotta laugh through it, or you're just gonna be miserable, you know? I mean, that's the thing, like being not to be the whole female comics, blah, blah, blah. But you know, as a woman, I'm sure guys have their issues as well.
Sure.
It's sometimes hard being a girl comic. Sometimes it actually works to your advantage. So you kind of have to focus on the good parts. You know, like I feel like I get more work because I'm a woman. I add something different to a show that, you know, maybe 3 white guys in a row, it gets a little boring for an audience or whatever. So I end up getting a lot of work because I'm a woman, but then also, you know, other stuff because you're a woman. Let's not focus on those things. But yeah, kind of if you don't laugh, you'll cry, right? So
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. That's awesome. And, I love that there is a certain flavor that you add as a woman. And I will say that I know it sounds like probably a little degrading to be like, oh, you're adding flavor because, that's, but I mean that in the most complimentary way. So I totally understand what you're saying. And I do think that you have a great personality for comedy, as I've mentioned multiple times in this, which leads me to my next question. When you started going down, like, let's say, you're going on the road, you're doing all these things. Was there maybe a moment in time where you were like, all right, I am officially a comedian. This is what I'm doing. This is my shot. Like after you took all these comedy classes, you're doing things when we were like, this is the moment where I feel like this is going to be my job.
I'm still not convinced I'm a stand-up comic. It sounds very bizarre. And I struggle with it. I keep doing it, but I have imposter syndrome. So I'm always like, in my brain, and I know this is insane, I know it, but I feel like there's somebody who can come and take away my stand-up comic card and get out. You're not part of, like, you're not, this is, because there's no degree, right? So there's like, anybody could do an open mic and be like, well, I'm a comic now. Like, so there's no real litmus test, but there have been times when I was like, oh, well, that's a thing. Like I remember I had this specific moment where I was on stage and I'm like, I don't feel nervous at all. Like, this is just, I'm just okay being here. Like, whereas before it would always, before you'd be nervous through your whole set. And then you'd be like, well, your nerves would wear off halfway through, or you'd be nervous just before you got up. And I still get a little nervous before I go up. But there was this moment where I'm like, I'm okay here. This is very weird for me. So it felt like, oh, you're here. Or when, people that I think are great comics are like, you're funny. That feels like a stamp in my passport book, but I don't think that I've ever gotten like, oh yeah, this is where I'm always like, I still question, like, do I keep doing this? Or it's like I don't play golf very often, but like I did a few times, and it was like, I'd always be terrible on the first 17 holes. And then on the 18th hole, I'd be like, oh, that was a pretty good shot. And then I'd be like, I gotta go back now. I gotta go back because I had that one good thing happen, and now I want to see what else would happen. Or like a Helium Records will be like, do you want to do an album? I'm like, yeah, shit, I do. Okay. So it's like, I have an abusive relationship with this career. It's been very good to me. It's been very good. I haven't had a lot of bad things. I haven't had a lot of creepiness or anything, but it's definitely like, I don't know. Maybe it's what keeps me here is like fighting to prove that I belong,
Well, I think you've done a great job with that. You seem, so you're doing great. I mean, if that's like some good validation, put the stamp in your passport. There you go. Doing good. Mollie Amburgey said that. It's all good.
Mollie says I'm doing good.
So it's a good compliment. And even though I'm nice and complimentary, I do mean that. People are going to be like, she always says nice things to people, but I really mean that. Speaking of going on the road though, was there, because you do talk about sometimes in your set traveling to different places, was there a certain story on the road where you were going somewhere, whether it's like the beginning of your career or maybe recently, where you're like, this is a cool story, or did something funny ever happen to you? Or what was just something that was really memorable with you if you're time traveling as a road comic?
As a road comic. All right, I'll tell this. This is going to sound negative, but...
It's okay. Keeping it real. Just laugh through it. And I'm gonna
laugh through it. Right, exactly. Look at you. I like
Love
it. I'm going to leave the guy's name out. Let's just call him Mark. That's not his name. But it was early on. That's not his real name. Not even his real first name. It was early on, and I was doing this terrible run. I lived in California, so you would get these, I think they were triple runs, and you'd have to do one show at like this really bad casino show in Nevada. And then you'd have to drive up into Washington and do this other show at like a bowling alley. And they were not good shows. But I was very early into comedy, and I was very like, oh no, these are my whole 15 minutes. And I'm going to do these, and I'm going to just do my best. And I'm in the room walking around, like running it, like an idiot, like just, So I get there to the casino room, and it's like, cha-ching, all the noises going on. I'm like, what's happening? So I get there, and the guy running the room is like, okay, you have to do your 15. And I was like, okay. And the people were actually really nice. And I think they were like, excited to hear like some comedy, and I did my time. And then the headliner had fallen asleep in his room, and he comes down, Mark, and he just is like hating on the crowd because they're not laughing, and he tells an 8-minute story that has no punchline, and he's eating all the garbage, and somebody yells out, "Bring Jill back!" And I'm like, no. I did my, and he's like, "Do you want to come back up here?" I'm like, no. Which is like, people bomb, and that's not saying that. So the next day, he says, "Well, can I get a ride with you to the bowling alley show?" Which is like 6 hours. And I said, "That's fine, but like, I have to drive back to Reno that night because I have a show. Like, I have to fly back out of Reno to do a show in LA. It's like a really important show because it was like Brody Stevens was headlining, and it was like my first like LA, like, oh, I get to do a show with Brody Stevens."
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, "Well, you don't really have to get back that night." And I'm like, no, I have to. And he's trying to convince me, like, just stay at the hotel. I'm like, no. So this drive from one shit show to the next, he's telling me how these shows are just basically paid open mics, and you don't have to do good material, and you wait in 10 years, this is how you'll be like me. And I remember the moment like thinking, that's not me. Like, even if nobody paid, even if I'm not getting paid, if I've committed to do a show that is selling comedy, I am going to do my job to make them laugh. Like, that's my job. And I would never treat a show as a way to just go up there and bullshit and talk, because it's not my job. Like, it's my job to make people laugh. And in that moment, I remember being like, like, that's not who I want to become. Like, I don't want to become this guy who gets paid to like ruin a gig for other people. Like, no, you've ruined the gig a little bit. Like, people are going to be like, the comics aren't funny, or, these people aren't any good. You don't want to see, like, I just felt like that was this moment that sort of like stamped itself on me. Like, remember this, because you don't want to become that guy, Mark. Mark,
Hashtag be like Jill.
Hashtag don't be like Mark.
Don't be like Mark. I love that, though, because I feel like there is, and I, after hearing your story, I can agree with you on that. There is like that one person that you're like, oh, cool. Like, they're headlining, they're going to be a great mentor. And then they're super negative, and you're like, oh, that is not going to be me, though. And so I really appreciate you being like, and I'm so happy you flew out, and then did your show in LA go well after you flew out? Yes, good.
What's crazy? So the night that we drove back to Reno, because he was like, "We don't have to drive back. You can just get up early." I'm like, no, there's supposed to be weather. I hit a bad snowstorm, like terrible. And had I left the next morning, I would have never made it. So I drove through the snow. He was high as a kite, just passed out in the back seat of my rental car. And I dropped him at like some casino where he could walk around until he got his hotel or whatever. And I made it. I made it to the show. It was just insanity.
Good for you.
But I did it.
You did it. Yes.
So suck it, Mark, you son of a bitch.
Yes, suck it, Mark. She killed it. She got out of Reno, and then she went back to, I love it. I love it. Speaking of LA too, I noticed that you've got like some TV credits, which is amazing and astounding. So props to you for that. You're like, it's fine. I know, because the thing is, for me, I'm like, that's wonderful. And everybody else is like, we're in LA. We all want our dreams. And I totally get that. But that's impressive to me. I saw there was something about The Office. Why don't you talk a little bit about that? That's very cool.
It was pretty funny because there's not like, I never watched The Office. So I was like, oh, this is a thing though. And I lived in Van Nuys, and they shot in Van Nuys at this big like warehouse. Like, so it was very weird. And I was supposed to be, I was the mom of this little kid, and there was supposed to be an interaction between the little kid and the guy who played Toby. But the kid kept clamming up, and the episode is called The Whale, and it's where he grows his mustache out for Movember or whatever. And I remember the kid just he kept clamming up, and I'm like, it's totally going to be cut. It's going to be cut, And I remember the guy who played Toby being like, you got to, like, your job is just to be skeeved out by me. And I'm like, yeah, that's not a problem. Like, he had this like super creepy mustache, like a coat. And I'm like, ugh. So we did the scene a few times, and then the kid was being real quiet. So I wrote a note to him because he's one of the producers on the show. So I wrote like a little thank you, and I just was like, look, this is not a big deal for you, but for somebody like me who doesn't do this a lot, this was really like it was important to me, and I appreciate how kind you were on set, and I had a lovely time, and blah blah blah. And they rewrote it. They rewrote it to be like, we get to hit on women. So they actually used the footage of me being like, like whatever. And they did like a voiceover where they actually used the footage. And I like to think it was because I sent the email or sent the little note or whatever. But it was just this kind of fluke, cool, weird thing that is supposed to be cut out. It should have probably been cut out because all this stuff, but it ended up in there, which is fun.
Oh, great. Now I'm going to have to go look. I haven't really watched The Office a lot either, but now that you're on it, I'm going to have to look for this now.
If you have to watch it all before that, I would have to watch everything up. So you have to watch all of The Office. It's like one of the last episodes. It's in the last season. Everyone's like, that was the worst season. I'm like, it's fine. But it was like a fun, cool experience. So that's,
that is cool.
All right.
No
couple
big deal.
Commercials and that kind of stuff, and but I don't miss it. I was always freaked out by it. I had a couple of times I got really close, like I for the what's the one with, see, this is where my brain is shitty, William H. Macy, where he's like really drunk. It's a family HBO. I don't know. I got really close on a couple of those. The casting director was like, it was between you and one other girl, and like we almost went with you. Always. Okay. And then I was told that there was the newsroom. I think it was Jeff Daniels in the newsroom, and there was a woman who was sort of like not an assistant, but this is happening, and she's behind the scenes. And I auditioned for that, and they're like, we were going to give it to you, but we decided to use that role for diversity. So they hired somebody of color, which is great because they should have diversity. And it's like, well, I kind of got it, but
You're right.
Really.
Yeah.
Those are good things. Like those are the things where it's like a loss, but it's also like, well, you're doing the right stuff. Like you would have gotten it if it didn't go that way. So at least you're doing something right.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now you are, but see, you're again doing things great. You've got your album, you've got all this stuff going on. Now, are you based in Tennessee now? Is that correct?
I'm getting progressively worse and worse for locations for comedy. I started in LA.
Yes.
I started comedy in LA, and then I was in San Francisco for a few years. And then my husband got a really good job in Memphis, and there's like one club here and it's black, and they're like, no, white woman, we don't need you. I'm like, come on, let me come on. They're like,
oh, he's so fun. Yeah, I got it.
Nashville's like 3 hours north, and it's great, and as far as being like a good place to get to places from, it's definitely that. Like I can get to St. Louis in 4 hours. I can get to Atlanta in 5.5. And, it's pretty easy to drive a lot of places from here.
Mm-hmm. Very cool.
So, yeah.
Hey, there you go. Yeah. I think you're doing I was going to ask too, about you just spoke about Tennessee and, what's available there. And you kind of answered my next question about is it close to, driving or getting to different places. But I feel like you're going to have a lot of experience in addressing an audience because, you were in LA and then San Francisco, even though it's in the same state, Southern California and Northern California, my uncle's from Redwood City. It's a very different vibe compared to exactly. Yeah. And then you're in Tennessee. Do you feel like your ability necessarily to adapt to different audiences has just come with your time and experience with doing comedy?
That was a decision I made early on. Mm-hmm. I remember being in LA and being at open mics and noticing what made other comics laugh. And it was the darkest, edgiest stuff, which we all love. I love dark humor, and I don't know that I'd be super dirty, but I have a very dark sense of humor normally in real life. It's how my family and I all cope with stuff. Mm-hmm. So to me, it can be hilarious, but in Omaha, it wouldn't work. And so it was one of those things where I decided early on, look, I need to be, I don't need to be, but I choose to be relatively clean. I want to be PG-13 clean because I need to be at least a little bit dirty because I think it's funny.
Yeah.
But also I wanted to be able to open for a lot of people. So like in order to do that, in order to open for like a John Heffron or even Alonzo Bowden, like he probably wouldn't care if I was dirty, he could follow whatever. But like in order to open for a larger percentage of comics, that I wanted to be relatively clean because that gives me more work. Mm-hmm. So that was a decision I made early on, even when I was, going up to that shitty show at the casino, I'm like, they're not going to want it. And what's interesting now is just talking to people after shows where, the audiences are a little bit older. They're like, you're raunchy, but you're just raunchy enough. Mm-hmm. I'm like, that's what I was going for. I don't want to be like super dirty, because then again, I won't be able to open for the people that I open for. Mm-hmm. So that was just, again, it's just a decision I made. You gotta, and if you're like, I want to do dirty, then do it. Be funny, but do it,
Love that. And I think that also opens up your flexibility. Just like you were talking about, you're able to work with this person, but then you're like, oh, I want to work with this person too. And you're able to kind of adapt, which this speaks of your style and your talent. So I always love to ask comics this. If you could describe your style in like a few words, what would it be? Like, what would people expect listening to your album, stylistic wise? What would they need to know?
Stylistic wise, I feel like, I don't know if this is going to make sense, but I'm a storyteller with traditional setup punchline jokes to prop up the story. So like, I tend to not alienate one side or the other. So I'm very like, and I mean male, female. So I'm not like a woman's woman comic or a man's woman comic. Like, oh, right, man, I'm a dirty, like I'm not trying to get them to like me for being a woman. And I'm not trying to get anybody to dislike me because I'm a woman. I'm trying to be a male comic in a female body. Does that make sense?
Yes, it totally does. I get that. Yes.
Yeah. So it's very, I think it's somewhat relatable. Either you're going to laugh at it or you're going to laugh with it,
Mm-hmm. I love that. That's good.
Is that kind of what you were asking? Or I don't know if that's.
Yes, that's perfect. I always ask for style just because, people all the time are like, oh, I like dark humor, or I like this. Or sometimes if they haven't listened to an interview yet, or they haven't listened to the album, they're like, well, what do you think? Like, if I was listening to this, what would you think I would like out of this? So I'm just going to cut that clip, and then I'm going to send it out and be like, here it is. She answered the question.
Here. You take it to,
and then suck it, Mark. There you go. Done.
Son of a bitch, Mark, if you're listening, you know what your name really is.
Yes.
Goddamn.
Also, apologies to anybody named Mark.
I should have picked a really good name.
It's like Mark's going to be the new Karen now, and somebody listening is going to be like, oh, typical Mark.
Look at this Mark over here throwing a fit about me. This is Mark doing not good material at a show.
Yes. I love that. Oh, I love it.
I want to add too that open mics are supposed to be hard and terrible. Just because we're sort of talking about how people get up and they're like, oh, this is really hard. And I think if a comic is doing the open mic because they've always wanted to do comedy, even if it sucks really hard, that you feel like I got to come back. It's like, again, that abusive relationship with comedy. We all have.
It is like, even for experienced comics, I've definitely seen experienced veterans like also at a mic, which is why they come in to go and bump on the list. And it's so great to see. But at the same time, you're like, oh, cool. Like even 20 years in, they're still working on material. That's great. Yeah. So I totally agree. Yes. I just always laugh, though, when people will go on stage. I only laugh, too, because it happened recently. There was this guy and he was doing an open mic and he was like, I'm so excited. He was telling his friends, he's like, I'm going to kill it. And then he walked out and he was like, that was really hard, guys. Didn't kill it. And I do have to give him the humility part came back in. But I
at
think
least you got that.
Exactly.
The people who kill me are the ones who are like, bomb for like 5 minutes. And then the last 30 seconds, they go, can we just give it up for the troops? And then they get this, he's like, I killed it. I got a round of applause. It's like, no, you didn't. The troops got the round of applause. You didn't get a standing. Like, those are the people I think are just out of their minds. Yes. Oh my God. So funny to me.
Give it up. Like, I do love a good give it up. Like sometimes because you... I
was telling my husband the other day, I'm like, stand-up comedy shows are the only shows or the only place in the world where you can go like, how's everybody doing? Come on, you can do better than that. Like, I wish my husband would come home from work and I'd be like, how was your day? And he'd be like, I mean, it was okay. Come on, you can do better than that. How was your day today? You know, it was great. I had a good day. We still have a lot of stuff. You know?
You're
So weird.
Oh
you
my
know?
God. It is
We honestly
though.
told you how we were feeling. We're like, we don't believe you. You're better than that. Please.
It's like the best when I was hosting for somebody the other weekend and I was like, do you want to give it up for your headliner this weekend or something? And you just hear like that little like round of applause like you do. And then you have to do the same thing. You're like, all right, they came all the way from LA to be here. So I'm going to ask you one. Like you're bullying people into being excited about something. And they're like,
step it up, you bastards. You're
it's a Sunday. Like what? Oh my God. That is
I used
so
to sometimes be like, I know we're going to go through this. I'm not going to ask you twice. So let's just do it all loud the first time. I'm going to need you to clap loud the first. Because I'm like, I'm not doing this again. Just clap loud. Just do your job. Get on the ball.
Like, can we just make this as painless as possible?
Yeah.
Thank you. Oh,
Yeah.
God.
So it's fun time. You know?
Oh, my God. Fun times. Oh, that made me laugh so hard. Yeah. The humility part is great, but it is funny when people, or, oh, my God. The other one is I'm blessed. That's the other thing. Is anybody blessed in here? Because I'm blessed. I'm like, okay.
No, you're not. You're
No,
lucky,
you're not.
maybe.
Exactly.
Bless my ass.
Right. Get that Red Bull. Suck it, Mark. Oh my God. Cannot. It was just, yes, give it up for the troops and I'm blessed. That is like probably the one, you know, and how are you doing? And everybody's like, we're here.
We already told you how we were doing. We told you for the last person who was on stage. Are you still doing okay? Yeah, you're okay. Sometimes you just want to be like, you're doing great.
Yes.
I'm not asking you. You're great. You're great. You're fine.
I love
fine.
that.
You're great. You know?
I think the only thing you can get away with is when it's like, give it up for your wait staff. And you're like, oh yeah, that is true.
They need to give it up.
Make sure you tip
hold that reserve too as a host, where I'd be like, if I bombed as a host, I would just come out and be like, all right, before we get your next comic up here, let's give it up one time for your bar and wait staff.
Yes.
Because it's a way to just use to get the room up. You're like, you hated me, but they're bringing you drinks, so clap
Love
it up.
them. Yeah. Yes.
They have bourbon. Love them. That's
Exactly.
my theory, you
Yeah,
know?
just keep getting those dollar bills. Oh my God, I love that though. That is, I totally forgot about give it up for the troops.
There was a guy, we did a theater show in San Francisco, and this guy just ate shit for 10 minutes. And then he did the give it up for, I just want to say one thing, we need to love each other. Oh, really? You're telling people in San Francisco they need to love each other? Go fucking figure. And then they'd be like, yay, you. And you're like, thanks, everybody. Thank you so much. It's like, what the hell? You know what I mean? That's not good.
And I'm like, I don't think the comedy show is probably the best place to be like, love yourself.
Self-care. Hashtag self-care. Like, shut up. You know? Like, you should be making people, it's your job.
It's my job to help you love yourself tonight, hopefully. That's why we laugh at this. Oh, my God.
Right. Can you help me love myself because I just ate shit for 10 minutes?
In fact, just love me. Forget about you for a minute.
Yeah. Like, we've all done it. Like, we've all had terrible sex, but what your job is to be terrible and then reevaluate your life and then make changes and then go back and be funny next. Like, this whole, like, at least use it as a learning experience. Don't walk off being like, yes, what? Did you hear them clapping? There was a standing ovation at I think they stood up. They were leaving because you were terrible and you made them clap. You know what I mean?
That is the best. I've also seen people like leave during a show too, where it's like, oh, the last couple of comics, are you ready? When it's like a show with more people on. And that always cracks me up too. It's like, is it me? It's like, oh, there's like 10 comics on the show. That's right. So it's like, I gotta go. Oh, man.
I'm only 10% of it at best, you know.
Oh my God, my stomach. I really needed that chill. Thank you.
I'm glad. That made you laugh.
Oh my God, absolutely. So see, this is going to be a great intro to getting Jill's album. Jill, why don't you tell us before you head out, where can we find your album and where is it located for streaming, downloading, all those fun things?
I know it's on Spotify and it was made on Helium Records, but I think you can buy it on iTunes and all that. Where all the cool kids buy stuff. I don't know. But yeah, you can stream it on Spotify. I don't know. Pandora's weird. So I don't know about Pandora. I haven't looked. Okay. But I know Spotify, right? I don't.
I did look it up on Spotify too. Yes, because I listened to it on Bandcamp. Yeah, I did. I looked it up. I was like, hey. So don't worry. I was like, look at my phone. I was like, I did look this up, right? Okay.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm the worst at promoting myself because I'm like, I know Helium Records recorded it, but when you said Bandcamp, I'm like, that's where it's at. Like, I think you could download it from Bandcamp, right?
Yes, that's right. So I downloaded it off of Bandcamp. You can also get on Spotify. Don't worry. Total like stalker mode, but this is my job. I'm supposed to be like, Jill's like, I can't.
You should like, follow me around.
Yes,
I would totally bring business cards or anything. People like literally people like Alonzo Bowden's people were like, how do we find you? I'm like, I don't know. My name's on that board over there. You can take a picture if you want to. And I'm like, I didn't bring anything. I don't record myself. I'm the worst. I'm terrible. This is going to be a kick in the ass to try harder. So I appreciate that.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, listen, you're doing great. It's just, I feel like, too, there's so many different platforms for social media now, right? Like even TikTok, like I have one and I just don't have with everything else we have to do as stand-up comedians. I'm like, oh my God, now I have to add another platform. And like, you don't know what phases out. Is it Twitter? Is it Instagram? It's too much after a while that I'm like,
I had a friend tell me about TikTok early on and I was getting like 100,000 views on stuff because it was like, there was very little stand-up comedy on it. And then they changed the algorithm and I'll get like 5 views. And people are like, oh no, you have to post a lot every day. I'm like, I'm out. I'm like, I can't, I don't have that much to say. I sit and write, like, I'm a compulsive joker. Like a joke will take me forever to work out because I'll be like, no, this word's not right. And it's too long. I got to change it. And like, that's, let's just be exponentially longer. Then my job is to write comedy and perform comedy. So like, I don't have time to be like, I can do an impression of this person on, no.
Right. Like, I feel like people now have to have like social media managers. So like half the stuff we even see now is like it's like clips and they're all good, but it's somebody else is posting that. There's just a lot of like, people don't realize, I mean, I know a lot of people who listen to this podcast are comedians like wanting to, keep going through and trying out comedy. But if you're somebody who listens just specifically for the interview portion of it and getting to know Jill, there is a lot that goes behind everything that you do with the comedy album, with the touring, with everything. I will ask a couple of things before we head out. Speaking of all the things that go behind the scenes, you mentioned your husband in your set, which I always laugh about because, you're like, he's quiet, he's a little shy. And there's like this great joke you have about like, oh, put on the nurse outfit. And you're like, oh, I gave him a bunch of paperwork. And I was one of them. I died laughing. I was like, oh, that's so true. And it's so raw and so real. What is he a big comedy guy as well? Like, does he also follow comedy and things like that? Or is he just, fan of Jill, which we all are. So I get it. Hey.
I'm gonna get out and be like, hi, everybody. I'm Jill. First of all, he has no interest in being a comic.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
And he's also an engineer. So he's very smart about comedy. So I can go, okay, I wrote all this down. Is this funny? And he'll go, that's funny. You don't need all the stuff at the beginning. So like, he's very smart. Like he understands it. Mm-hmm. He wouldn't necessarily be like, this is a funny joke, but he's very good at it. He enjoys comedy. Like he'll come to every show he can come to just to see me do it. Oh. I'm like, you've seen this 1,000 times, but he also likes watching everybody else. Like he loves to watch comedy, but he's not interested in doing it, which is perfect for me. And he also is like, accidentally brilliantly funny like once every 2 years. Like he'll see something and I'll be like, oh my God. Like we were living in LA and we moved from one house to the house next door because the woman who rented the house to us wanted her house back. And it just so happened that like the house next door became available. Total fluke. And this girl, everybody couldn't stand her. Her name is Andrea. And she just has like 3 beagles that barked all the time. And all the neighbors were like, you should just buy the house. We want you guys to live here. Because my husband would just go over and fix stuff for people. Like it was just that, And so we were driving past her house one day, and out of nowhere, my husband just goes, nobody likes you, Andrea. Like that. And it just, like, out of nowhere, and it just decimated me. Like, it was so funny to me, like, this teenage girl type, like, nobody likes you. And he's just, like, the 6-foot car guy. Like, it just, like, so that stuff will kill me once every couple of years. But he isn't, like a joke writer or like a performer. He would hate to do all of that. So yeah,
we need consumers. We obviously need consumers of comedy. I was just curious if he also was like a writer as well too, or, you know, I know you had mentioned he's a car guy, engineer, all of that, but you know, since you were in engineering and you ended up in comedy, I didn't know if we were going to have a duo show where he's like, and I'm going to show up too.
No. But I definitely look at jokes mathematically. Like I'm a pattern type person, like you set up punchline, like you set up a pattern by having two of the same thing, and then you break the pattern by having something different. Or like, okay, if I say this phrase but add a twist at the end, if they're expecting like, you know, this, then you know, like, so I look at it a little bit mathematically. So I think that's probably where his like input comes in as well, is like mathematically it's funny.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, I love it though. I think that's great. Like I said, it's just a different perspective on it. I've never heard it like said like that before. So I really appreciate, like, everybody has their own, like their own perception of it, right? Like some people are like, it's a boxing kind of thing, like it's 1-2 or something, or it's just like, oh, you know, sometimes I don't even know what I'm going to say, and then I get on stage and it just comes out. Like everybody has, I mean, everybody has their own method of doing stuff, or they don't know the sequence per se, but then they have their jokes at least, and they can fit them how they please. But I do appreciate the precision of it, just because although I do have an artistic brain, I do also have that organization side of it. So I do appreciate you saying about the mathematics and applying it to it, which leads me to my last question. Speaking of perception and reflection and mathematics and organization, what maybe all the things wrapped into one that make up Jill?
One little ball of twine.
Oh, ball of twine. Love it. It's always a cheesy thing, because I used to say this a lot to him, like, what advice would you give? But I will say I've gotten some of the best responses by kind of rephrasing it and being like, what is something you know in comedy now that you wish you maybe had known sooner or have reflected on, that you feel that you're able to share on this podcast today?
I wish I'd known sooner. I think that, like, as far as like a useful little tip, I'll say this. The comedy that you listen to, the comics that you enjoy and you listen to, are typically a reflection of what your sense of humor is. Mm-hmm. So if I'm a big fan of Gary Goldman, I like the way he unpacks. I like his precision. I like his like use of specific words, and like, this was a funny word, and this is, you know, that spoke to me before I ever did comedy. And so it's a good way where if you're new and you're like, well, I like this super dirty joke, but this super clean joke, and I'm telling a story here, and I got a couple of things here. It's a good way to go, okay, well, with this stuff in mind, how can I use that to inform how I would write jokes, or like what appeals to me? You don't want to copy that person,
right?
But their style, if they're like a John Mulaney as a storyteller, or, you know, Bill Burr is really in your face, or, you know, whatever, you can use that to say, this is a little glimpse into where in a couple of years my comedy will probably shake out to be. Does that make sense?
Yes, that was, wow, what a good answer. Great job. Oh my God.
I'm very, very good. And the set getting more intimate as you go on. I think it's, you know, you can't just spring stuff on people. You let them get to know you a little bit, and then you can talk about more intimate stuff. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I got to give you props on that too. You did on the album, which again, laugh through this, look it up, not just because she's sitting right here and on this interview, but it is very funny. I recognize some jokes, and then there were some new ones I hadn't heard yet, which was great. But Jill's delivery is a lot of fun. And now you know the whole story behind it. So just make sure you check it out. Spotify, iTunes, Bandcamp, all the things. Just look it up. The other thing I'll ask you, Jill, I know you have some shows coming up this weekend. What are your shows that you have coming up?
I am featuring for Michael Yo at at Rick Bronson's House of Comedy at the Mall of America in Minneapolis.
Okay.
That's a mouthful. And then I'll be in Des Moines the first weekend of December. But then that's like for the holidays, I don't have much going on, which is okay.
That's okay.
I'm all right. You know. But yeah, so that'll be fun.
Sounds good. Well, best of luck with that. Yeah, if you're in Minnesota, which we do have people listen from different parts of the country. So if you are in Minnesota, I've had a couple of people, because I have this map that shows up about where people are listening. I've had a couple of people. I'm like, who is in Michigan? But yes, if you are in Minnesota, make sure you check out our girl, Jill. Give it up for her. Give it up for the troops. Give it up. You're blessed. You're going to be great. And suck it, Mark.
Suck it.
Yeah. Yes, I love it.
And thank you for having me, Molly, and welcome back after your hiatus. Good for you.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, it's just been, I think just with shows and life, it's been crazy, but I've missed interviewing people. So thank you for breaking me out of my shell and letting me have the chance to get to know you better and talk to you. Absolutely. And just if you're ever in St. Louis again, just let me know. Love to.
I am gonna. We're gonna have drinks and talk more.
Yay! Sounds good. Now, what are you gonna casually do now that our episode's over?
I'm gonna casually take my makeup off and put some sweatpants on, probably.
Get it, girl. Me
more
too.
Casual than I am already.
Oh, sounds good. We'll have a lovely day. Have fun with your dogs and your shows. Thank you so much. At Jill Maragos.
Thanks, Molly.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.